Hello and welcome to Jerry's Live. My name is Michaela Westra and I'm going to be your host today. If you haven't joined us before and you haven't heard about our class code, everything that I will be using tonight, I have a code for today's class, which is JL366. And if you type that in our website, JerrysArtarama.com, it will show you the entire list of everything that I'm using. And today is going to be a very fun episode for me because I love both of these mediums so much. So we are talking about the difference between oil pastel and oil sticks. Now I know a lot of times they sound very similar, they're made very similarly, but what is the biggest difference between them? Not just how they look, how they're used, but different techniques that you can use for each. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So I have, to start out, just a little box of oil pastels. Now these ones are going to be a little bit different from the other ones I show you, but this is basically what people think of when they haven't really used oil pastels before. This is what they think of. And the reason is because when these were first created, these were intended to be like another version of a crayon. So they're made for like children's use, and over time, Sennelier actually worked with Pablo Picasso to create an artist grade version. So I'll show you a couple different kinds since we're talking about oil pastel first. They come in a lot of different forms. So these ones are going to be, they're soft, but they're not the softest you can get. So these are really nice for those detailed areas, a really nice, precise line work. And then I have these guys, which are so much fun because they are basically these, but bigger. Now, if you've ever made a large piece of oil pastel work and you've done a large area in just one color, you might run out of one of these super quickly, but using a big boy, it's going to last a lot longer. Now, this is just Munyo. There are quite a few different brands, but my favorite right now is the Soho Extra Soft, and they are exactly like they sound. They are very lipsticky, they're very smooth, and very fun to move around. And I like these especially because on the inside it has little techniques that you can use if you haven't used them before. There's graffito, lines, layering, blending. I'm going to go more into this a little bit later because I have tools that you can use for these and different mediums that you can use for these. But if you guys haven't seen these before, here's what they look like. And I'm going to keep these out while I talk about the oil sticks, then we can start comparing and contrasting on the same surface. So for oil sticks, I have two different brands here. I have Sennelier, and then I have R&F. Now you can see that they have slightly different names. So the Sennelier calls them oil sticks, and R&F calls them pigment sticks, but they are the same thing. And if you are starting to notice, this is a pack of 6, and then these are sold independently in open stock. And that's very different from the oil pastels, which you saw. You can get 72 in one set, so that's quite a few colors. Now, what is the biggest difference between these guys and our oil pastels? The biggest difference is going to be the way they are made. Now, both of them are made with oil, pigment, and wax. However, they have a different type of oil in each as well as a different makeup. So, oil sticks, or pigment sticks, have a drying oil and have not as much wax in them, just enough wax where it can hold that cylindrical shape. Where the oil pastels, they also have pigment, wax, and oil, but these are made with a non-drying oil. So these will never dry. where these will act just like a regular traditional oil paint and dry through oxidation. Now let's see what these look like on a surface, like how they look different on a surface. Now I have two pieces here. I have this guy, which is done using only pigment sticks or oil sticks and a brush. So it looks very similar to an oil painting. And then this is an oil pastel drawing using only oil pastels on the surface, no other tools. So I'm going to show you different tools on how to manipulate and control this medium, but you can definitely use it straight off the bat. Now, the surfaces that you can use for these are also a lot of fun, because the surfaces that I'm going to show you that these work with are actually two new products. So this oil stick surface is made on the Mimic PET cradled canvas panels. So this is going to be that synthetic material made from plastic bottles woven into a canvas-like surface and then mounted on a really nice Da Vinci wood panel. Now this is great because using oil sticks, you're going to be using all the same surfaces that you would use for oil paint. So you want something that is going to be treated and primed with either gesso or acrylic so that it doesn't eat away at your surface. Yes, we have a question.
Sorry to go back a little. We
No,
have
you're
a
good.
question on TikTok. We're wondering, so you can never fully seal a painting if it's done with oil pastels?
You can. So I'll actually jump into that now. I have different ways to seal both of these things. So for the oil pastel, this one in particular, I did seal this one. The only way that you can really seal oil pastel so that it's not sticky and it doesn't pick up dust, so if you want to frame this without glass, you have to seal it with a varnish. Now I have a spray varnish that is specifically made for oil pastel. This is going to be a combination of alcohol and resin. So once it is fully coated on here, there's going to be a thin layer of resin preventing the oils from interacting with anything else. So I can take my hand, run it down, and I haven't picked up anything because I've sealed this with quite a few layers of this fixative here. Now, since we're on that topic of sealing, the oil sticks, you're going to be sealing it the same way you would seal a traditional oil painting. So I have Tuscan Pine Instavar. This is my favorite oil varnish. This I have not varnished yet because I made it a couple days ago and it's still a little damp to the touch. But once it is touch dry, you're able to jump right in with this Instavar, varnish it, and then it's fully sealed. Now you don't have to do that, again, just like any traditional oil painting. You don't have to varnish it for it to be able to cure on its own. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some tools and techniques with these. I have that Mimic panel for my oil sticks, and then I have this new Soho oil pastel pad. And it is so much fun to use, and it's so useful because not only does it have paper that's great for oil pastel, but it has this interleaving glassine that helps protect the surface from the next drawing in the book. It is also perforated along the top, so once you're done with your sketch in the book, which is easily packed up and brought away with you, you can tear it out, frame it, do whatever you need to do. Now, I know there is oil in the oil pastels, but you can use it on paper. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these oil pastels. Let me get set up a little bit. And the reason you can use almost any surface, maybe not, I shouldn't say any surface, but most surfaces with oil pastel is because the amount of oil that is in the oil pastel is a lot less than an oil stick. It also has a little bit more wax to it than an oil stick does, and that definitely helps it from eating away at your surface. So I'm going to move some things around again. Now I have a few tools, and the fun part is you can use all of these tools for either of these mediums. So let's go ahead and see what these different oil pastels look like. Like I said, these Mungyo are not quite as soft as those extra soft Soho oil sticks, oil pastels. Oh my goodness. Yes. Now let's go ahead and see what they look like. They go on kind of like crayon, but maybe a little bit softer than crayon. It's kind of hard to explain. And as I'm putting this on here, you can see the texture of this paper. It has like a very fine woven texture that helps that oil pastel adhere to the surface. And then I'll find a similar color in the Soho. So they look and work very similar, but you can see that the line work on the right is just a little bit thicker, and where it starts to fill in, it fills in a little bit thicker. Now you can find your preference of how it works, like how it feels. They'll have a similar look. The Soho, since it is softer, it's going to be easier to move around. So if you're using other materials or mediums, that's probably what I would go with if I was moving it around more instead of just laying it down on the surface. Now, the different things that you can use to do that, so these mediums that you can apply to move this around. I'm going to be using a brush, but there are a couple different ways that you can blend it using a medium. So you can use linseed oil. You can also use mineral spirits. They're going to have a different appearance based on which one you're using. And keep in mind, if you are introducing something else into your art, like linseed oil, you're going to want to use a surface that is going to work with that added material. So if you are blending with mineral spirits or that linseed oil, I would use a surface like the Mimic here, where I don't have to worry about any of that oil seeping into the paper. But let's see what each of those looks like since we have this here. And as I'm pulling this out, I have one more new product to show you guys in this episode. And that is going to be the Pro Stroke Premium White Bristle. And the packaging art is new, as well as the handles. There's a really nice velvety handle to these, and I love them so much. So I'm going to grab one of these. I did choose the set of 5 brights. Brights are going to be my favorite shape to work with. I wouldn't say I picked it solely because this shape is great for these materials. I feel like the shape doesn't usually affect it that much with how you're working. But let's go ahead and see. I have a question?
I have 2 questions whenever you have time, if
Yeah.
you have time now. One, is the drying time affected by the type of surface that it's on?
For the oil pastels? Okay. Drying time with oil pastels, there's not going to be a time where it dries. The oil sticks, I don't think there's going to be a change in dry time depending on the surface. I can definitely deep dive and see if I'm wrong. I'll look into that for sure. Actually, I'm going to add this to my panel here so we can see what those different mediums do to the oil pastel. So I'm starting with that linseed oil. We can move it around. It is going to react differently than the oil sticks. You can see that the mark making that I created kind of stuck around once I started moving that pigment around. And then let's go ahead and switch to Studio Solve. Now, if you are using one of these, one is going to dry a lot faster than the other. Of course, it doesn't really matter all that much since the pastels aren't going to dry, but the surface will remain oily with that linseed oil a little bit longer than the Studio Solve has to dry. So this is the Studio Solve. Again, it's moving that pigment around, but you're still retaining the mark making that you created. Now the oil sticks, I'm going to do the same thing on here because you can use these two mediums for those as well. And while I have these, I believe R&F has changed their packaging, so if you order 2 of these different colors and one comes in a tube and one comes in a box, I think they're just switching things around. I believe the box is going to be the newer packaging. And they have a little thing in here that shows you how to open it, where it has this little note here where you pull that out and it lets you access your oil stick. Now I'm just going to add this up here. You can see just how much more smooth and creamy this is in comparison to those oil pastels. But let's try that linseed oil. I'll start at the top here. And as I'm moving that around, it moves the entirety of that paint because it really is just oil paint in stick form and is not retaining those marks underneath. You have another question?
Yes, over on YouTube, they wanted to know what your favorite oil sticks were because you said your favorite oil pastels were the Soho.
Yeah.
So, oil sticks being different.
Oh,
which ones do you
really
prefer?
hard. Okay. I feel like I'm used to working with R&F when I'm using my encaustics. And I'm going to continue. This is the Studio Solve. I'm used to R&F when it comes to encaustic. And I haven't used Sennelier quite as much. I have noticed they have very similar consistencies, but I believe the R&F is a little bit creamier. So similar to how the Mungyo is going to be closer to a crayon texture than the Soho. I really like that creaminess, so I might have to say R&F at this point, but it's really hard to choose. I don't know if I could really decide. All right. Now those are the mediums that I was using. You can also use different tools. You have another question?
Yes, I know you mentioned varnishing earlier, but we had somebody ask again about varnishing, and then as well as that, also talk about putting an oil pastel or oil stick piece under glass.
Okay, yeah. I'll do the glass one first. So if you are framing either an oil stick piece or an oil pastel piece under glass, it is going to be very important, especially with oil pastels, that there is a space between the top of that piece of art and the glass, because it doesn't dry, it can attach to that glass and create kind of a funky 3D effect. So always make sure that there's a space in between the surface and the art. Framing oil stick art is going to be a little bit trickier because you don't often paint with these on a flat surface. Now you could treat a piece of paper so that you can put oil on it, but I would still make sure that there's a space between, because the surface attaching to the glass is just a nightmare, speaking from personal experience. So yeah, the varnishing. So just to kind of go over that again, oil pastels, you want to make sure that you are using a spray varnish, and this one in particular by Sennelier is going to be a mixture of alcohol and resin, so it's going to create a nice thin layer of resin that seals off the top layer of your oil pastels. Now everything underneath that is still going to stay a little wet, it's not going to dry, but the surface will be touch dry. So that means you can frame it without glass if you wanted to. It is still going to be susceptible to dust, so always be careful with that.
Would you use that same fixative if you were trying to seal oil pastels that were used like on top of an acrylic painting?
Yeah, you could do that.
Okay.
It is going to have a little bit of a sheen because of that resin. It can get glossy with how thick those layers get. So as long as you're okay with the final surface, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Finish?
Finish, yes. As long as you're okay with the finish, there should be no issues with that.
And then really quickly,
Yeah.
Can you use them under acrylic in a mixed media piece, or do they break the fat over lean rule?
I don't know about the fat over lean rule, but it doesn't dry. So since it doesn't dry, you can't put anything on top of it. So if you are doing mixed media with oil pastel, it is very fun to use oil pastel with so many different mediums because it works with so many different mediums, but only as the top layer. Actually, I'll show you guys. I'll grab a fun color here. The same applies for oil paint or oil sticks. You can put oil pastel on top of a dry oil stick or oil painting, but you cannot do the other way. So you can't put the oil on top of the oil pastel. And since it has a non-drying oil and it will never really dry, it doesn't have the oil doesn't have anything to really adhere to. So let's kind of see what that looks like. And really, it's mostly just pushing the oil pastel out of the way. Of course, you can do it if you really wanted to, but I really wouldn't recommend it. It's really going to mess with the drying time of the oil, and it's not really a fun combination when they're both wet like that. Now, like I said, you can put oil pastel on top of oil stick. Now I don't have a dry oil stick painting, but I do have a dry oil painting. So let me go ahead and add some color with my Soho Extra Soft Oil Pastels. It is going to adhere to that surface. It is good to note that if you are working on a textured oil surface, this is super soft and it's going to get into all those nooks and crannies. And a fun technique that I learned through encaustic is, oh goodness, I've lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Oh, yes, sorry. You can use something super soft if this is fully dried and cured and hard. You can go in and cover this entire thing with oil pastel and wipe the surface, and that oil pastel is going to stick in those nooks and crannies. I haven't tried it with an oil painting, so I don't know how difficult it would be to wipe it away, but I do think that's a really fun technique. Let's add some grass down here. Do we have any more questions?
We have one on Facebook, and they were wondering if you can use oil stick, not oil pastel, at the same time as you're using regular oil paints in a painting?
You can. The oil sticks are basically oil paint. The only difference is there's just enough wax where it holds a shape that you can draw with. And the whole fun part of using oil sticks is you don't have to use any brushes. You don't have to use any solvents or mediums. It's a very direct way of painting with oil. So that's the really unique part of those oil sticks. Have another question?
Yes, over on YouTube, they wanted to know, can both of these mediums be used in a sketchbook?
Oil pastels, yes. Oil sticks, not unless it is treated with something that helps prevent that oil from leaking into the surface. And as I'm adding these oil pastels in here, I can go in and manipulate it with different materials, whether that be a blending stump or I guess my finger in this moment. But actually, let's go ahead and take a look at different techniques on the paper. Now, the Soho Oil Pastel Pack set has this little thing that we were looking at earlier. It has different ways of using different techniques. Now, my favorite is actually the Sgraffito. So I'm going to start with that one. And I'm actually going to combine the Mugno and the Soho. Now, just to kind of show you when it comes to Sgraffito, whatever you scratch into, hold on, let me explain what Sgraffito is. So Sgraffito is going to be when you scratch back into the surface of oil pastel, for example. And when you scratch into the surface, you're going to kind of pull back whatever was that first layer. So usually the color of the paper, or whatever the color of the paper turned out to be when it was stained with the oil pastel. Now, really fun thing to know about Sgraffito is if you put down a color first and then you add another color on top, that top color is going to be what you see, but when you scratch into it and do that Sgraffito, the first layer that you put down on the paper is going to be the color that shows through. And I thought that this would be a perfect way to kind of show you guys something I used to do when I was little. When I was younger, I used to go to my grandma's house. Shout out to Grandma Westra. And we used to do crafts together. We used to do fun little art projects. And my favorite thing to do was this thing. Here, let me blend this in. Have you guys done that scratch art? Where you scratch away to like the metallic surface or something. We would do this with crayons. And you can actually do this with oil pastels as well. So I put down that layer of orange and yellow and red, and now I'm covering it up completely with that extra soft oil pastel. So now my surface is black. But now I can go in. Here's my first tool I'm going to show you guys. These are some pottery tools, or some sculpting tools. I really like these because they have a really nice, there we go, really nice fine tip, hard point that's not going to tear at my surface. I can now go in and whatever I put down first is going to be what pokes through. So here's a funky little flower. I'll show you guys up close. So this is kind of a fun way to show you, but you can use it as a technique in your more fine art. So I actually have the oil pastel art I did for the oil pastel pad, which is here. And you can see, for example, these little windows over here on this building. I laid down that light green first, covered it with all of these other colors, and scratched back to that really nice pop of color. So even though this is kind of like a fun kids craft I learned when I was little, it is definitely usable in fine art, just like oil pastels themselves. Like I said, they were originally created as a art material for kids, and we were able to use and understand them to the point where we can use them in fine art. So let's also do a little bit of blending. You can blend on the paper, but you can also blend off the paper. So you can blend two colors together here, or another fun tool I love to use is a palette knife. Now you can, if you really wanted to, pretend this is my palette. You can chop off a little bit of both. Now this is a lot easier with the Soho. I should probably have used that instead. Let's see. We'll do both, see what the difference is. This is a lot easier to chop up if you're using a palette knife. Let's do some green. And since these are softer, if you are doing a technique like this, the Soho Extra Soft is going to be a lot easier to manipulate. Now you can mix these colors off to the side and apply them like this. Using a palette knife like this is the best when you have that really bright white highlight at the end and you've completed your entire oil pastel. Let me clean this off. You can use your palette knife, and here, I'll use this light gray. Just scrape a little bit off the top here, and you can see, hopefully, I have just a little bit on the top of my palette knife. I can just dot a perfect little brush stroke onto my surface. Now, of course, you can use your sculpting tools to do this as well. The sculpting tools have different surfaces, so you can create different lines, like something really thin, or pull out a whole huge chunk at once. Make sure you guys can see that. So I had a really thin line go from here down, and I just used the entire width of this sculpting tool to pull out a full rectangle. Now, the last tool I have is the wipeout tool, and it's going to be very similar to those sculpting tools, just a little bit more malleable. It moves around a little bit more. And this is great where if you have a really thick area of two different colors, you can fill in those open spaces because there is a texture on this paper. You can fill in those open spaces in the paper by moving that pigment deep into that texture. So it really just took away the graininess like it has up here. I just pushed it into the texture of the paper, and it's really nice for blending because it has that soft surface. Now, I did say that you can use all of these tools for an oil stick as well, so let's go ahead and look at some different techniques with that surface. We'll just use the rest of this guy here. And let's take a look at the Sennelier oil sticks, because we haven't looked at those yet. This is going to be a set of 6. Introductory set with some really nice mixing colors. You have another question?
Yes, over on YouTube, they wanted to know, can you use oil sticks and oil pastels together in a sgraffito technique? Or can you even do sgraffito with oil sticks?
You can while it is still wet, but not the way that I showed you with the black over the colors. Because it is so soft, it's going to just mix with whatever you put on top. Now you could just move the paint around, which, let's go ahead and look at that. Something dark, blue maybe. Now you can move the paint around and pull up to that surface again, but it is going to be basically stained with that color you put down. So you can kind of move it around with these tools, but if I were to put another color on top to cover it, it's just going to blend together. So let's do this yellow. If I were to put that on top, it's just going to blend together and make a green. Now, I wasn't able to show you guys something yet that's very important when it comes to these oil sticks because I've used these recently. Now, remember the biggest difference between these guys was that the oil pastels don't dry, while the oil sticks do dry because they are just like oil paint. Now, what that means, let's look at this red one because it hasn't been opened yet, is the surface of this stick is going to dry. It's going to create a film on top that protects everything inside from oxidation. And you can see as I'm peeling off this protective film, it's pulling off that top skin layer. Now it's great to just start where it has that peel off with that protective plastic. But once that creates a new skin, the next time you use it, or once it dries, it's going to have that skin back. So now that I've peeled that top skin layer off, I can use it right away. Now, if you have, like this green one I used recently, and it's starting to dry a little bit to the point where it won't rub off on my finger, you can use, I don't have my rags up here, you can use like a rag or a paper towel to just kind of twist it into that rag or paper towel, and it will peel off that whatever thin layer you have for these oil sticks. I think they're gonna grab me a piece of paper towel. Thank you. So I do this not just to clean, because once I have other colors on here, I want to get that off before it dries. You can also use this paper towel to peel that whatever thin layer you have of that dried skin off, so you can jump right on and use it. Alright. Now, I use the wipe up tool up here to kind of move that paint around. You can do the same thing with these pottery tools if you want to move that oil stick off the surface or around on the surface. Now, these tools aren't quite as fun with the oil stick because it's just like oil paint. So these are weird tools to use with oil paint, but I did want to show you guys that they can be used for both. I don't know if I would recommend the sculpting tools for the oil sticks, but you can use it if you wanted to. And lastly, we have the palette knife, which you do use with oil paint pretty often. So this is a really nice tool, especially for these oil sticks. So the same thing. You can take some of this off with a palette knife and place it onto the surface and create some really nice texture. And you can use a brush. Now, this way of using a brush with oil sticks is really fun because, like I said, this is just oil paint in stick form. You can't do this as well with oil pastels. You could if you really wanted to and you had a medium on your brush, but you can just take your brush to the top of your oil stick and pop in some color just like that. Because like I said, it is just oil paint in stick form. Like I said, that biggest difference between an oil stick and oil paint is it has just enough wax in there so it holds its shape. I will say that because it has wax in it, oil paint is going to be the better option if you want just an oil painting. But these are really beautiful for those fun, expressive, direct marks. All right. Now let's go ahead and make some art, since we got a couple of minutes left. In the chat, let us know which of these two mediums was your favorite. And any colors that you might not have seen that you might want to see. I'm just going to kind of doodle around with these materials while we wait for any last minute questions. Alright, so this is another Mimic canvas, or not canvas, panel. And this is a good material for both oil pastel and oil stick. So I'm just going to put both on here. I'm not going to layer them just because they move each other around and I don't know if I really enjoy that. So let's go ahead and make something fun. I haven't used this one yet. This is the RNF Cobalt Violet Deep. And this is such a pretty color. I used this on this oil stick painting here. But I did tone the surface orange, so I didn't really get to see the vibrancy, like the full vibrancy of this color. Let's go ahead and make something. I'm thinking floral, like maybe, what is that one flower called? Iris?
I mean, that is a flower.
Is it the purple one with the 3 leaves?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Do the oil sticks have an odor?
They smell a little bit like oil paint. They're not crazy when it comes to smell. Do you guys smell it from where you guys are sitting? Okay. Yeah, it has a light smell of oil paint, but it's not crazy. And I'm just going to move this paint around with my brush. Again, you really don't have to. The biggest benefit with these sticks is you don't have to use mediums or brushes. But I like really smooth blocks of color. Alright, and then I have some yellow and white. I'm just going to go in and add some highlights here. Let it mix with that purple. Get more colors. The best way to kind of create something more unique with something this kind of direct and expressive, sorry, just making up words. And I already forgot what I was talking about, so let's let's just keep adding some fun little pops of color. I don't fully remember what this flower looks like, so just bear with me, guys. I'm just here for the vibes. Alright, and I really love this cadmium green pale, so I'm going to start adding this around the edges. We have another question?
Yes, you used an olive green oil stick. Can you tell us what that color is?
Was it this guy or this guy?
Not sure.
So this lighter green here is going to be that cadmium green pale. Love this color. And then this is going to be, let's find that color name, Vert Permanent Green. I think those are the only 2 green sticks I have. Yes, another question?
How do you keep your blender stump clean? Isn't the blender
Yeah. Like the blender stick or like a blending stump that you're blending your things together?
Let's go both.
Okay. So blending stick. So if you have a pigment stick that has no pigment in it and it's just a blending stick, to keep that clean, you're going to do the same thing that you do that I was showing earlier. You're just going to make sure that you're wiping off the surface of those other colors before you put it down for the rest of the night or whatever. If you have a blending stump that you're using to blend things, of course you can use that, but it's not going to stay clean because those blending stumps and things are made out of like paper. That's going to be like a one-time use and then you won't really be able to use it again. If you're using something like this guy, this just wipes off super easy with like a Soho wipe and it's ready to go.
Can you remind us what panel you're working on?
Yeah. So this is going to be the Mimic mounted panel. So it's a PET synthetic material that is woven from plastic bottles into a really nice like canvas texture. I don't know if you guys can see that texture in there. It's very uniform, but still comes off as like a canvas texture. And it's mounted to a wooden panel that's cradled on the back.
And if you're using the oil sticks on that, would you need to treat it for oil paint?
Nope, it is ready to go. Another question?
The color that you have laid down on that panel already looks so solid. How do you keep your colors so consistent when you're applying them like that?
Like, so it's not like blending with everything?
Or like skipping over the surface, or both?
Okay.
Really?
So the biggest thing is kind of understanding how it goes on the surface. So I've kind of gotten used to how it works. The best way is with these oil sticks, they're so soft. So just add a little extra pressure and it goes on without skipping any of that canvas texture. Since oil pastels, let's take one of these Mungyo, which have just a little bit more wax in them. This, you're going to want to press down really hard to make sure you're not skipping any of that canvas texture. Whereas the Soho, don't have to press down quite as hard since it has more of like a lipstick consistency.
How would you clean your brushes at the end of each of these ventures?
Oh, that's a great question. So when you are using brushes with oil sticks, you're going to clean them the same that you would with oil paint. So you want to use a solvent to break down what's on your brushes, and then clean it in the sink with a brush cleaner, and then you're good. With oil pastels, I have thought about this question before we went live, and it's such a hard thing. You can do the same thing. You can use mineral spirits to clean off that. I wouldn't use that brush for anything else afterwards, just in case, because it has those non-drying oils in it. You don't want that to mix with your traditional oils, and then maybe your painting doesn't dry. So just be careful with that. Another question?
Yes, they wanted to know, can you actually mix dry pastels with oil sticks?
Dry pastels, oh, like soft pastels, like powder pastels, with oil sticks. I mean, you can try it. I don't know how they would combine. They require different surfaces. So let's say, for example, you have a piece of paper that's treated with acrylic so that you can put oil on it, or gesso, or whatever. You've treated this paper. You can go and add the soft pastel on there. Hopefully it's not got like an acrylic-y texture. You want something that's kind of, it has texture, but it's not like slick, if you know what I mean. That's really hard. I don't know if I personally would combine them, but I can try it out and see what happens. I don't think they would work super well together, would be my answer. Alright, now let's see. I'm going to add some blue shadows to my potential iris here. Another question?
Yes, is there a way for you to get a point on the oil sticks or the oil pastels?
Yes. I would use a palette knife for that. Keep in mind that if you do this, you might be using more material than you might end up using, if that makes sense. So I would just kind of sharpen it to a point using a palette knife. Now, like I said, you're going to have a lot of excess material that you might not end up using, so you can either use it elsewhere or maybe use it for something else, but you are going to be removing a lot of material in order to create a point on one of these. And since it is so soft, that point might not last very long. Same thing with oil pastel, you'll do the same thing. And since it is soft, the point might not last for very long. Another question?
With oil pastels or oil sticks, how would you wash it out of your clothes if you got it on something, or even like an apron?
Oh, an apron is meant to be dirty. I should say that one. Like, if you got something on your apron, it lives there now. That's just how it goes. I don't know if I know the answer to how to get it out. I would treat it like any other oil that got into your clothes and treat it that way.
So I actually have a sort of answer for this one.
Yeah.
I always pre-treat for oil, like a grease stain, because it has that oil content. You have to get to it really fast. And if you're worried about it getting on anything or inside your actual washer for your other clothes, they have little portable washers that you can get on Amazon.
Oh.
And I also use those to wash our reusable rags.
Oh, that's awesome.
So
okay,
it
yeah.
kind of goes hand in hand, but that way you won't get oil paint on your actual washing machine, and it'll be a little bit safer.
Love that. Thank you, Emmy. Alright, now let's go ahead and make a flower in oil pastel, and we'll call this oil stick flower good. We'll wait for any last minute questions, and then we'll finish up for the day. I'm going to try the same thing, see if I can figure out what makes an iris an iris. For some reason I'm thinking like it's like a 4-leaf clover, but with like little pops of yellow and orange. And then I feel like it gets, like, isn't there like a gradient of purple to white? Or am I just thinking of, I don't know how things look. Hey, look at that. Let's go, Amanda, giving me a reference photo. There's like a couple, what was that?
It's the mean Alice in Wonderland flowers.
Oh.
Do you remember that?
I do. We don't like that flower. Alright, that's kind of, yeah. And then layering with these guys is going to be a little bit different. I left a little spot of just pure white here. It is going to kind of mix if you work it a little too much. So I'll show you guys. You can just go straight in with a little bit of pressure and then lift, and it will layer. If you kind of fuss with it too much, it will start to mix what's underneath. So this is for the oil pastels. If you are layering things, don't mess with that one area too much, otherwise you'll get blending, especially if you want something that's kind of like a stark contrast between colors. And you could also use the palette stick for this as well. So let's do a little dot of white right in the center here. Maybe I'll add a little bit to these petals. Alright, and then we'll add some background. Any final questions, or are we all set? Alright, do we have a consensus on what everyone's favorite medium is of these two?
Oh, I did not tally. There were so many.
Okay.
I did not tally over on
It seems
YouTube.
pretty
Sorry.
split on Facebook.
Okay.
Pros and cons of each, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we were heavier on the oil sticks on YouTube, but I feel
Okay.
like, I mean, it was pretty split too.
Alright, and then just like the oil sticks, the oil pastels clean up the same way. If you get colors on here together, which, let's see, if you get colors on here together, same thing. Just wipe them off so that the color is completely gone. This is especially important when it comes to your whites. You want to make sure you preserve those whites for as long as possible. Alright, so that I'm going to call make sure I add those other little petals. I'm gonna call that for today. That was our information heavy episode for you guys today. I really hope you enjoyed and you try these out for yourself if you haven't used them before. These are some of my favorite mediums, I will say. But thanks again for joining us. Join us next week if you want to continue with the fun. We have Emmy on next week, and she's going to be talking about gouache tips and tricks. So everything that you could possibly know about gouache, or the most important parts, who knows. She's going to be covering that for you guys, and some of the art that she's making is really stunning. So definitely join us next time. All right, see you guys later. Bye.